Under a banyan tree, an old monk once watched a young boy try to control the movements of a candle's flame. Each time the wind stirred it, the boy would cup his hands, build walls, even shout at the breeze. The monk smiled, quietly handing him a glass lantern. "You cannot stop the wind," he said, "but you can choose how you protect your light." In many ways, modern life feels like that boy constantly trying to control the uncontrollable. We chase promotions, perfect our schedules, tidy our relationships into neat boxes, and try to predict tomorrow with the tools of today. And when things slip, because they always do, we feel the flame flicker and panic sets in. But the Buddhist view on control is not about suppression. It is about understanding. To begin with, Buddhism reminds us of a fundamental truth: impermanence. Everything changes. Clinging to control is like trying to hold water in your fists. The tighter you grasp, the quicker it escapes. There was once a wealthy merchant whose entire life was a structure of order. His days were scheduled by the hour, his investments calculated to the decimal, his children's futures planned before their first steps. One day, a fire swept through his home while he was away. When he returned, everything was ash. The villagers watched in silence, expecting grief or rage. But the man simply sat down and stared at the sky. Someone asked, "How can you be so calm?" He replied, "I had mistaken the walls for safety, the schedule for certainty, and my things for peace. But the fire has given me truth, and truth is lighter to carry." That is the wisdom that emerges when we loosen the grip. Control is often just fear wearing a mask. Fear of the unknown. Fear of losing status. Fear of pain. But as the Buddha taught, suffering is not in the change, it is in the resistance to change. There's a gentle story of a bird and a storm. When the winds rise, some birds hide. But the eagle, it said, spreads its wings wider and lets the storm lift it higher. Buddhism invites us to be like the eagle, not by braving the storm with arrogance, but by understanding it and riding its currents. In the same spirit, mindfulness is our lantern. When we become aware, not reactive, not judgmental, just aware, we create space between the wind and the flame. We see our emotions without becoming them. We observe our thoughts without obeying them. A woman once came to the Buddha holding her lifeless child, begging him to bring the boy back. He told her he would, but only if she could bring him a mustard seed from a house that had never known loss. She searched all day, from house to house, and every door she knocked on, she found grief had already visited. She returned, empty-handed but awakened. Control is often an illusion, and wisdom begins when we see through it. It is not about passivity. It is not about giving up. It is about knowing the difference between what we can guide and what we must accept. In today's world, this might mean surrendering to a career that's shifting, a friendship that's fading, or a future that won't match the one we planned. But the gift in letting go is spaciousness. And from that space, peace rises not from controlling life, but from dancing with it. They say the bamboo bends in the wind, but does not break. Strength is not in rigidity, but in flexibility. And wisdom is knowing when to stand and when to bow. In the quiet town of Amara, nestled between mountains and riverbeds, lived a watchmaker named Elias. Known for his precision and discipline, he crafted timepieces that never lost a second. His world was orderly, predictable, and he liked it that way. But his desire for control extended far beyond the gears and springs of his craft. He managed every aspect of his life meticulously, his meals, his conversations, even the way he grieved. When his wife fell ill, Elias applied the same precision to her care. He recorded every dosage, tracked her every symptom, and consulted doctor after doctor. But despite his efforts, she slipped away one morning as the birds began to sing. The loss shattered him, not just because of love, but because he had done everything right, and it still wasn't enough. In his sorrow, Elias stopped repairing watches. He stopped speaking. He sat in silence, watching the seconds tick by on clocks he no longer understood. One evening, a traveling monk passed through the town and sat beside him. "You once controlled time," the monk said softly. "Did it ever obey you?" Elias shook his head. "Then perhaps it's time," the monk smiled, "to stop measuring life by seconds and start living it by stillness. There is a form of suffering unique to those who seek control, not the suffering of external chaos, but the internal collapse when that control inevitably slips. Buddhism teaches that attachment to control is one of the roots of suffering. It stems from ego, the illusion that if we try hard enough, we can shape the universe to our will. But the truth is, control is a mirage in the desert. You see it shimmering, promising comfort and certainty. But the closer you get, the more it recedes. What remains is thirst, not for dominance, but for clarity. This is where the Buddhist principle of equanimity enters apika in Pali. It is the calm amid the storm, the balance of the mind that does not chase or resist. It does not mean indifference. It means presence. It means accepting both praise and blame, gain and loss, pleasure and pain, without clinging to either. Consider the story of the farmer whose horse ran away. His neighbors said, "Such bad luck." The farmer only said, "Maybe?" The next day, the horse returned with 2 wild horses. "How wonderful!" The neighbors cried. "Maybe," said the farmer. His son then tried to ride one of the wild horses, was thrown, and broke his leg. How terrible! Again, the farmer, "Maybe." Soon after, soldiers came to the village to conscript young men. Seeing the boy's injury, they passed him by. Life will always swing. Control tries to stop the pendulum. Equanimity learns to stand still as it moves. For Elias, healing began not in reclaiming his schedule, but in releasing his grip. He started walking each morning without a map, letting his feet decide. He opened the door of his shop, not to fix watches, but to listen to the ticking of silence. The monk had given him no tools, no teachings carved in stone-only space. And in that space, Elias met himself for the first time, not as a man who orders time, but as one who simply inhabits it. There's an old saying, the tighter you hold the sand, the faster it slips through your fingers. Sometimes control is the very thing that breaks what we are trying to preserve. Letting go does not mean letting fall. It means trusting the ground will catch you when you do. And in that surrender, wisdom begins. In a small fishing village by the sea, there lived a woman named Mira. She was known for her strength, her clarity, and above all, her control. She rose before dawn, prepared her nets with care, and taught her children discipline in all things. Her life was like the tide, measured, rhythmic, and familiar. But the sea, as it does, began to change. Storms grew more frequent, fish more scarce. One morning, her boat did not return. It was found days later, broken on the rocks. Her husband, who had taken it out alone, was gone. Myra's world fractured, not just because of grief, but because the laws she had lived by, the ones that said effort yields safety, order ensures peace, had failed her. For days she did not speak. Then one evening, an old friend brought her to the temple on the hill, where a monk was speaking not of gods or commandments, but of wind, waves, and the illusion of control. He said, "The ocean does not promise calm, only depth." Buddhism, in its essence, is a path of seeing clearly. And when it comes to control, it teaches that much of what we believe we can manage is only a projection of our fear. The more we try to control others, our partners, our children, even strangers, the more we reflect our own unease with the impermanence of life. It is natural to seek control. It gives us a sense of power, of identity, of safety. But in truth, it is a house built on sand. The winds of change, of illness, of time, they do not ask for permission, and they do not negotiate. What we do have, however, is response. We have the choice to meet chaos with panic or with presence. The Buddha likened this to being struck by two arrows. The first arrow is pain inevitable. The second arrow is our reaction optional. Control tries to avoid the first arrow endlessly. Wisdom learns to stop firing the second. There's a well-worn fable of a man dangling off a cliff, holding on to a vine. Above him, a tiger. Below him, another. As he hung there, a single wild strawberry caught his eye. He reached out and ate it, and in that moment he tasted the sweetness of now. Mira, after many visits to the temple, returned to the sea not to reclaim control, but to be near the place where her illusions were burned away. She no longer measured her days by how much she caught or how clean the house was or how obedient her children. She began to notice the texture of her son's laughter, the way the wind braided her hair, the feel of her breath in the early morning chill. She was not less disciplined, but she was no longer a prisoner of control. She had learned that surrender is not weakness. It is wisdom wrapped in gentleness. A Chinese proverb whispers, "Tension is who you think you should be. Relaxation is who you are." Buddhism invites us to return not to a past version of ourselves or a perfected one, but to the quiet truth beneath our resistance. There we find a steadiness that does not depend on outcomes. Letting go does not mean losing everything. Often it's the only way we can hold what truly matters. There was a monk who lived in a high mountain monastery, far from the cities and their noise. Each morning he would walk to the cliff's edge and watch the valley below awaken mist rising from the fields, smoke curling from chimneys, people beginning their day. One of his students once asked, "Master, why do you come here each day?" The monk answered, "To remind myself how little I need to change the world and how much I need to see it clearly." In our pursuit of control, we often mistake involvement for influence. We micromanage, interfere, correct, and plan. We think if we just say the right words, send the right message, make the perfect decision, we can shape others' behaviors and protect ourselves from disappointment. But control is not love. And love, true love, asks us to let others be. This too is a Buddhist teaching, non-attachment. Not detachment, cold, distant, but non-attachment. The ability to care deeply without clinging tightly. It is a hard lesson, especially in relationships between lovers, between parents and children, between friends. We want the people we care for to follow the paths we believe are best, but they must walk their own. Our task is not to control the journey, but to walk beside them with open hands. A father once came to the Buddha, frustrated that his son had abandoned the family trade to wander and meditate. The Buddha asked him, "Do you love your son, or do you love your version of him?" The difference pierced the man like a silent bell. That is the power of letting go, not as an act of indifference, but as an act of deep respect. Think of the lotus. It grows in muddy water, untouched by the dirt. Its roots do not resist the dark. They use it. So too must we learn to sit with what we cannot control and bloom anyway. In daily life, this might mean listening without interrupting, allowing someone to be upset without trying to fix them, releasing the need to always be right. These are quiet practices, but their impact is immense. There's a phrase, soft is stronger than hard. Water is stronger than rock. Control is often rigid. Wisdom is soft. It yields, not from weakness, but from knowing what cannot be bent must be flowed around. One woman, Clara, struggled for years with her daughter's choices. She wanted her to pursue stability, marry well, earn consistently, settle down. But her daughter painted, traveled, lived out of a van. Their conversations were a minefield. Then, one day, Clara stopped advising. She started asking, "What do you love about this life?" She said softly, and her daughter wept not from pain, but from being seen. That day, a new relationship began, not one shaped by control, but by curiosity. Letting go in relationships doesn't mean stepping away. It means stepping aside so love can walk freely. It means trusting that everyone's path is sacred, even if we do not understand it. The monk on the mountain does not tell the valley how to rise. He watches, he witnesses, and from his stillness, others learn to breathe. In the heart of the city, where horns blare like restless thoughts and buildings stretch like ambitions, lived a man named Theo. He had built his life around certainty, financial forecasts, calorie counts, daily affirmations, productivity apps. His planner was color-coded. His emotions, however, were not. Theo believed that wisdom came from control of outcomes, of people, of himself. But no matter how he managed his time, success never tasted like satisfaction. Joy was fleeting. Rest felt like a pause between battles. One evening, exhausted and sleepless, Theo walked into a park he usually passed without notice. There he found a small sign by an old tree that read, "Sit, breathe, watch." He sat. He breathed. He watched. It was strange, at first, how loud the silence was. How unruly the mind becomes when you stop giving it tasks. But he stayed. The world, without needing his approval or input, continued. And something inside him softened. This is the beginning of insight in Buddhism, not through study alone, but through presence. Wisdom is not accumulated like wealth. It arises when the noise quiets and we see clearly, without distortion. Control, in many ways, is a response to fear. If I control enough, I will not be hurt. If I know enough, I will not be surprised. If I try hard enough, I will be enough. But this is the great misunderstanding. The Buddha taught that suffering is not in the change of life, but in the refusal to let it change us. Like holding breath in a world meant for breathing. There's a Zen story of a professor who visited a master, eager to learn. As the master poured tea, he kept pouring until it spilled over. The professor exclaimed, "It's full." The master replied, "Like this cup, you are full of your own ideas. How can I show you wisdom unless you first empty your cup?" Theo, over time, began to empty his own. He let go of needing to know what came next. He stopped measuring conversations by usefulness, started walking without tracking steps, and once even stood in the rain just to feel it. His colleagues noticed a shift. Not laziness, not indifference, but peace. He still worked, still planned, but now there was space around it. The tightness had loosened, like a hand unclenching. This is what Buddhism calls right view, not a belief, but a way of seeing. When we stop controlling, we start perceiving. And with perception comes wisdom, not as something to wield, but something to embody. One morning, Theo returned to the tree where he had first sat. A child was playing nearby, trying to catch falling leaves. She laughed each time one escaped her grasp. "Almost," she'd say, "almost." And then she lay on the grass and let the leaves fall around her. Theo smiled. That, too, was wisdom. Not catching every leaf, but resting in their descent. When we stop gripping life, it does not collapse. It opens. When we stop trying to know everything, we begin to understand. And when we finally release control, we do not fall, we fly. There once lived an old gardener named Ansel, who tended a small, quiet plot behind a monastery. His hands were weathered, his pace unhurried. Every day he worked among herbs and flowers, speaking gently to the soil, humming melodies that had no words. People would pass by and ask, "Why do you work so slowly?" He would smile and answer, "Because the garden doesn't grow faster when I rush." And neither do I. Ansel had once been a merchant in a distant city, sharp, ambitious, deeply respected. But his life had unraveled in a single season. The loss of a child, the end of a marriage, and the betrayal of a business partner. Everything he had built with calculation and care dissolved. He came to the monastery not to find God, but to escape himself. It was there he discovered the truth. That control had never protected him. It had only distracted him. What he needed wasn't order, it was healing. And healing does not come through control. It comes through allowing. One of the central teachings of Buddhism is the nature of impermanence, anicca. Everything that arises will pass. Joy, sorrow, success, failure, health, illness, they are all waves, and we are not meant to anchor ourselves to any of them. But the modern mind struggles with this. We want to bottle happiness, cancel sadness, predict outcomes, master pain. We want every moment to behave like a contract, predictable, manageable, obedient. Yet life is not a contract. It's a current, and control is often a dam we build against its flow, thinking we can hold back sorrow or prevent surprise. But even dams crack, and when they do, the flood is fierce. Ansel learned to stop building walls. Instead, he learned to listen to his breath, to his grief, to the rain falling on broad leaves in the early morning. He did not fight his memories. He bowed to them. He watered them, not as weeds to be removed, but as seeds that shaped his becoming. One afternoon, a young novice came to him, frustrated with his meditation. "I try so hard to focus," he said, "but my mind keeps drifting." Ansel handed him a handful of sand. "Squeeze it," he said. The boy squeezed, and most of the sand spilled through his fingers. "Now hold it gently." The boy cupped it softly. The sand remained. "Some things," Ansel said, "are only held when we stop gripping." Letting go of control does not mean surrendering to chaos. It means recognizing the dance. We are not choreographers of life, but dancers within it. Our steps are part of a larger rhythm, sometimes graceful, sometimes clumsy, but always unfolding. There is an ancient proverb, "You cannot push the river. You can only flow with it." And so Ansel flowed, not with bitterness, not with fear, but with the gentle trust of someone who had lived through the worst and still found beauty. Control had failed him, but presence had saved him. And that garden, blooming quietly behind the monastery, became not just a place of herbs and flowers, but a testament that peace is not born from mastery. It is born from surrender. In a small village nestled between mountains and mist, there was a bell tower that rang only once a year on the first full moon of spring. Legend said the bell had no ringer. It only sounded when the village was truly at peace. For decades it had not rung. Many believed the legend was mere myth. Others blamed the noise of modern life or the villagers' endless disagreements. But one woman, Elia, believed differently. She believed the bell reflected the state of the heart. Elia was neither a priest nor a scholar. She was a baker. Her days were filled with flour and fire, kneading dough before sunrise. Yet people came to her not only for bread, but for the comfort of her presence. She listened more than she spoke, and when she did speak, her words felt like a warm meal, simple, nourishing, enough. One day, a traveling monk passed through the village and stopped by her shop. He asked, "Why do you think the bell remains silent?" Elia smiled and replied, "Because we try to control peace instead of becoming it." This, the monk realized, was the heart of Buddhist wisdom. Peace is not something we enforce. It is something we embody. Modern minds chase peace like a product through schedules, strategies, silence retreats, even meditation apps. But true peace cannot be bought, forced, or even achieved. It is uncovered like the sky behind clouds. And often, the biggest cloud is the need to control. The Buddha taught that suffering begins when we resist what is. The mind says, "This shouldn't happen. That should have gone differently. I must fix this." We grasp at outcomes, clench around emotions, try to script the future like a play. But peace is not in the script. It's in the space between the lines. There is a story of a samurai who approached a Zen master and asked, "Where is the path to peace?" The master said nothing, just continued sweeping leaves. Frustrated, the samurai demanded, "Speak." The master looked up and said gently, "You asked, and I gave. You did not listen." In Buddhism, listening is not just with the ears, it's with the presence. When we stop trying to impose order on life, we begin to hear its subtle music. We notice the wind through trees, the pause between heartbeats, the breath we forgot we were holding. Elia's peace did not come from having a quiet life. The village still argued, weather still changed, ovens still burned loaves now and then. But her inner world was quiet. She did not try to control her neighbors. She listened to them. She did not demand certainty from life. She offered trust instead. And then, one spring evening, when the moon hung full and the air smelled of yeast and flowers, the bell rang. No one had touched it. They say it was the wind. Or maybe it was Elia's heart, echoed into the sky. Control often believes it can build peace, like bricks into a wall. But Buddhism teaches us that peace is not something we construct. It is what remains when we stop grasping, when we soften, when we breathe. The bell, like the soul, rings not from force, but from stillness. There was a young man named Levi who had spent most of his life chasing what he called the edge. He believed that control was power, and power was everything. He'd managed his career with precision, timed his meals, curated his image, and prided himself on never being surprised. Success to him was mastery over uncertainty. But with each achievement, Levi felt more hollow. He began to notice that joy, when it came, was short-lived. Sleep eluded him. Laughter felt rehearsed. Relationships became negotiations. Everything had to be predicted, perfected, and processed. What he couldn't control, he avoided. One night, during a layover in a quiet coastal town, a storm grounded his flight. With no meetings to attend and nothing left to organize, he wandered into a small tea shop run by an old woman with silver hair and eyes like calm seas. There were no menus. She handed him a cup and said, "Sit. Let the tea decide." He chuckled, then paused. It was such a simple thing, yet something about her presence slowed him down. The tea was earthy, warm, and unlike anything he'd had. No ingredients listed, no calories counted. Just an experience, unmeasured, uncontrolled. And for the first time in years, Levi felt something unnameable. Not excitement, not relief, but a kind of still, quiet okayness. The Buddha once said, "Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." Levi had always sought peace in external control. But sitting in that tea shop, he realized peace was not something to get. It was something to stop resisting. In Buddhism, there's a teaching known as the second arrow. When life wounds us through loss, failure, betrayal, that's the first arrow. It hurts, but we often shoot ourselves with the second arrow by resisting, overthinking, trying to control what cannot be undone. Levi had been living in a forest of second arrows. He stayed in that town for 3 days. No plans, no goals. He walked along the shore, let the rain fall on his skin without running for cover. He spoke with strangers without rehearsing. He sat in silence without checking his phone. And he began to notice something profound. The world did not fall apart when he let go. In fact, it opened. He recalled a phrase he had read once but never understood. A bird doesn't sing because it has answers. It sings because it has a song. Levi had been searching for answers, but what he needed was to remember his song. Letting go of control doesn't mean letting go of care. It means shifting from force to flow, from grasping to presence, from strategy to surrender. He returned to his life, but not to his old ways. He still worked, still showed up, but he began to notice the pauses. He greeted discomfort like an old friend. He listened more and spoke less. And in doing so, others began to soften around him. Control can command fear. But presence invites trust. And trust, Levi discovered, is where wisdom begins. Not because we finally figured it all out, but because we stopped trying to. In a bustling town where ambition ran like a river, there lived a woman named Maya. She was known for her sharp mind and unwavering discipline. Every decision, every word, every plan was carefully measured and executed. To the outside world, she was a symbol of success. But inside, she carried a secret struggle, a restless mind that refused to settle, a heart burdened by the weight of constant striving. One evening, after a particularly taxing day, Maya found herself wandering into a quiet temple at the edge of town. The walls were adorned with ancient symbols, and the air smelled faintly of incense and thyme. She sat down on a wooden bench, her thoughts swirling like autumn leaves caught in a gust. An elderly monk approached and sat beside her, saying nothing at first. After a moment he asked gently, "What troubles your mind, child?" Maya sighed. "I feel as if I'm always chasing control over my work, my relationships, my life. But the harder I try, the more elusive peace becomes." The monk smiled softly. "There is a story I can share. Long ago, a great king invited a wise man to teach him about wisdom. The wise man brought a lotus flower and asked the king to hold it tight. The king grasped it firmly, but the flower wilted. Then the wise man said, 'True wisdom and control come not from grasping, but from gentle holding and understanding.'" Maya pondered this as the monk continued, "In Buddhism, this gentle holding is the path of compassion and mindfulness. When we try to force outcomes, we create tension and suffering. But when we allow life to flow, embracing uncertainty with kindness, wisdom arises naturally." Maya realized her constant need to control was like clutching that lotus, beautiful things broken by too much grip. She decided to practice presence, observing her thoughts without judgment, allowing emotions to pass like clouds across the sky. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, Maya felt her restless mind soften. Challenges still came, but they no longer triggered panic or despair. She learned that wisdom isn't about controlling every detail, but about trusting the unfolding of life. One night, as the temple bells tolled, Maya felt a calmness she had never known, a quiet confidence rooted not in power, but in surrender. This surrender, this release, was her true cure. In the quiet folds of a faraway land, there lived a humble potter named Rena. Her hands shaped clay into vessels that held water, food, and sometimes stories. She worked patiently, day after day, turning earth into form. Rena's village was often swept by harsh winds and sudden storms. The villagers fretted over the weather, their crops, their futures. They sought ways to predict and control the uncontrollable, building walls and hoarding supplies. One evening, as a fierce storm approached, Rena sat outside her workshop, watching the dark clouds gather. A neighbor hurried past, anxious and shouting, "We must prepare. We must control what we can." Rena smiled quietly and replied, "The clay I work with does not resist the shaping hands, but it does not resist the winds either. It is strong because it bends." Her words puzzled the neighbor, who hurried away. The next morning, after the storm passed, the village found many fences broken, yet Rena's pottery remained intact. Her house, built with curved, flexible wood, had swayed with the wind but stood firm. This story echoes the Buddhist teaching of non-attachment and equanimity, the strength that comes not from rigidity, but from openness and acceptance. Modern life often demands we control every variable, our jobs, relationships, emotions, fearing that loss of control means loss of security. But the storm teaches otherwise. Flexibility and presence are the true shelters. The saying, "The bamboo that bends is stronger than the oak that resists," captures this wisdom. Rena's life was not without hardship, but through her art and attitude, she embodied the Buddhist cure for wisdom and control. To embrace impermanence, to flow with change, and to find peace and surrender rather than struggle. This, she knew, was the path to true resilience. As the river flows endlessly toward the sea, so too does our journey of wisdom and control unfold, not as a conquest, but as a gentle surrender. The teachings of the Buddha remind us that peace is not found in grasping tightly, but in releasing softly. Each moment offers an invitation to let go, to soften the mind, and to meet life with open hands and an open heart. In the quiet spaces between thought and feeling, between effort and ease, we discover the true cure, not control imposed from without, but wisdom blossoming from within. This is the path that leads to freedom, resilience, and deep, abiding peace. May this journey, told through stories and truth, guide you gently home to yourself.